William Thompson had always been a man of simple pleasures. At 62, he enjoyed his morning coffee on the front porch, tending to his vegetable garden, and the quiet evenings spent reading newspapers by the fireplace. His wife Margaret had passed away 3 months ago after 40 years of marriage, leaving behind a house full of memories and a heart that still ached with every sunrise. The Victorian home they had shared stood on Maple Street like a guardian of forgotten times. Margaret had inherited it from her grandmother, and every corner held stories spanning 3 generations. William found himself wandering through rooms that once echoed with laughter, now silent except for the occasional creak of old wooden floors settling in the evening hours. It was a crisp October morning when William decided to tackle Margaret's jewelry box. He had been putting off this task, knowing it would bring waves of grief crashing over him again. The ornate wooden box sat on her vanity table, untouched since the day she last opened it to choose earrings for church. Her reading glasses still lay beside it, folded neatly as if she might return any moment to claim them. William's hands trembled slightly as he lifted the lid. The familiar scent of Margaret's lavender perfume drifted upward, making his eyes water. Inside, layers of compartments revealed a lifetime of accumulated treasures. There were the pearl earrings he had given her on their wedding day, still nestled in their original velvet box. A silver bracelet from their honeymoon in Italy caught the morning sunlight streaming through the lace curtains. Each piece told a story. The gold watch from her retirement party at the elementary school where she had taught for 30 years. A delicate chain necklace their daughter Sarah had made in high school art class. Margaret's class ring from college, somehow still fitting her finger even in her 70s. William smiled through his tears, remembering how proud she had been to graduate magna cum laude at a time when few women pursued higher education. As he carefully sorted through the jewelry, planning to divide meaningful pieces between Sarah and their granddaughter Emma, William noticed something peculiar. He had expected to find Margaret's wedding ring among the collection, but it was nowhere to be seen. They had matching sets of simple gold bands, purchased from a modest jewelry store downtown when money was tight and dreams were big. William paused, his brow furrowing with confusion. Margaret had worn that ring every single day of their marriage. Even when arthritis made her fingers swell and other rings became uncomfortable, she never removed her wedding band. She would joke that it had become a part of her finger, grown into her very being over the decades of wear. During her final weeks in the hospital, William remembered the nurses asking if they should remove her jewelry for safety reasons. Margaret had weakly but firmly refused, clutching her hand protectively against her chest. The nursing staff had honored her wishes, understanding the deep significance of that simple golden circle. William distinctly recalled seeing the ring on her finger during the funeral preparations. The mortician had asked if the family wanted to keep any jewelry, but William had specifically requested that Margaret be buried wearing her wedding ring. It seemed wrong to separate her from something that had been such an integral part of her identity for 4 decades. Now, staring into the empty jewelry box, William felt a chill run down his spine. Where was the ring? Had someone made an error at the funeral home? The thought of strangers handling Margaret's most precious possession made his stomach turn. He grabbed the phone book and frantically searched for the funeral home's number. "Henderson Family Funeral Services," a gentle voice answered on the 3rd ring. "This is William Thompson." "You handled my wife Margaret's service 3 months ago," William began, his voice shaking slightly. "Of course, Mr. Thompson. I remember Mrs. Thompson well. Such a lovely lady. How can I help you today?" "I'm looking through Margaret's belongings, and I can't find her wedding ring. I specifically asked that she be buried wearing it, but now I'm worried there might have been some mistake." There was a pause on the other end of the line. William could hear papers rustling as the funeral director searched through records. "Let me check our documentation from that service," the voice said professionally. "I'm looking at the preparation notes now." It shows here that Mrs. Thompson was indeed wearing a gold wedding band when she was brought to us, and our records indicate she was buried wearing it as per your request. William felt a mix of relief and renewed confusion. If Margaret had been buried with her ring, then why did he have such a strong memory of seeing it in the house afterward? Age was catching up with him, and sometimes his memory played tricks, but this felt different. This felt important. "Thank you," William managed to say before hanging up the phone. He returned to the jewelry box, this time examining each compartment more carefully. Perhaps Margaret had hidden something, left him a message, or kept a spare ring he didn't know about. His fingers traced every velvet-lined corner, every small divider where she had organized her collection over the years. In the deepest compartment, underneath a layer of tissue paper, William's fingers brushed against something unexpected. It wasn't jewelry at all, but a small envelope with his name written in Margaret's careful handwriting. The paper was cream-colored and slightly yellowed, suggesting it had been there for quite some time. William's heart began to race. Margaret had left him a letter. With shaking hands, he carefully opened the envelope and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. The date at the top read exactly 1 year ago, when Margaret had first received her cancer diagnosis. "My dearest William," the letter began in the flowing script he had fallen in love with all those years ago, when she used to write him letters during his brief military service. "If you are reading this, then I am no longer with you, and you have finally decided to go through my jewelry box. I knew this day would come, and there are things I need to tell you before you discover them on your own." William's hands trembled as he continued reading. Margaret's words seemed to reach across the divide between life and death, her voice as clear in his mind as if she were sitting beside him. "There is a secret I have kept for our entire marriage, not because I wanted to deceive you, but because I was afraid of losing the life we built together. Hidden beneath the loose floorboard under my side of the bed, you will find something that belonged to me long before I became your wife. I pray you will understand and forgive me for keeping this part of my past locked away." The letter continued with instructions on how to find the hiding place and a plea for William to remember that her love for him had always been real and unwavering, regardless of what he might discover. It ended with a simple, "Forever yours, Margaret," followed by a small postscript that made William's blood run cold. "The ring you will find there is the reason I never took mine off. I couldn't bear to see them side by side." William read the letter 3 times before the full implications began to sink in. Margaret had hidden something under their bedroom floor for 40 years. Something connected to another ring, another life she had lived before they met. His mind raced with possibilities, each more troubling than the last. He folded the letter carefully and placed it in his shirt pocket, close to his heart where Margaret's secrets now weighed heavily. The afternoon sun was beginning to slant through the windows, casting long shadows across the bedroom floor. William knelt beside Margaret's side of the bed, running his hands along the wide plank wooden floors that had been in the house for over a century. It took several minutes of careful examination before he found what Margaret had described. One of the floorboards near the nightstand had a barely perceptible gap along one edge. William used a butter knife from the kitchen to carefully pry up the board, revealing a shallow space beneath. Inside the hiding place was a small metal box, tarnished with age and wrapped in a piece of faded blue silk. William lifted it out with the reverence of an archaeologist uncovering an ancient treasure. His hands shook as he unwrapped the silk, revealing an ornate jewelry box much older and more elaborate than the one on Margaret's vanity. The box was made of silver with intricate engravings around the edges. It looked expensive, the kind of thing that would have been a significant purchase decades ago. William hesitated before opening it, knowing that whatever lay inside would change his understanding of the woman he had loved and lived with for 40 years. Inside, nestled on a bed of midnight blue velvet, was the most beautiful ring William had ever seen. It was clearly a wedding ring, but unlike the simple gold band Margaret had worn throughout their marriage, this one was elaborate and stunning. The band was platinum, set with a large diamond surrounded by smaller stones in an intricate Art Deco design that spoke of wealth and sophistication. But it wasn't just the ring's beauty that took William's breath away. Engraved inside the band, in elegant script, were the words, "Forever yours, James," followed by a date from 1952, 6 years before William and Margaret had met. William sank onto the edge of the bed, the ring box clutched in his trembling hands. Margaret had been married before. She had been someone else's wife, someone else's forever love, and she had never told him. For 40 years, she had kept this secret buried beneath their bed, hidden away like a shameful memory. Questions flooded his mind. Who was James? What had happened to him? Why had Margaret hidden this part of her past so completely? Had their entire marriage been built on a lie? Or was there more to the story than this single devastating discovery? As the sun set outside their bedroom window, William sat in the growing darkness, holding evidence of a life Margaret had lived before him, a love she had carried in secret throughout their decades together. The ring caught the last rays of daylight, sparkling with all the brilliance of a love story William had never known existed. Tomorrow, he would begin searching for answers. Tonight, he would grieve not only for the wife he had lost, but for the woman he realized he had never truly known at all. William barely slept that night. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the ornate ring box on Margaret's nightstand seeming to pulse with secrets in the moonlight filtering through their bedroom curtains. Every creak of the old house made him think of Margaret's footsteps. Every whisper of wind through the trees sounded like her voice trying to explain what he had discovered. By dawn, he had made a decision. He would find James, or at least find out what had happened to him. The ring and the date engraved inside provided clues, and William had always been good at solving puzzles. It was one of the things Margaret had loved about him, his methodical approach to problems and his refusal to give up once he set his mind to something. After a quick breakfast of coffee and toast that tasted like cardboard, William drove to the public library downtown. The head librarian, Mrs. Chen, had been there for decades and knew how to navigate the labyrinth of historical records, newspaper archives, and genealogical databases that might hold the answers William desperately needed. "I'm trying to find information about someone from the 1950s, William explained, showing her the ring and the date engraved inside. "The name is James, and this ring is dated 1952. I believe he might have lived in this area." Mrs. Chen examined the ring carefully, her experienced eyes taking in every detail. "This is beautiful craftsmanship. Art Deco style, probably custom-made. A ring like this would have been very expensive in 1952. The person who bought it had significant means." She led William to a computer terminal and began showing him how to search through digitized newspaper archives from the 1950s. "We'll start with marriage announcements and society pages. A ring this elaborate would likely have been part of a notable wedding that made the local papers." For 3 hours, William scrolled through endless pages of old newspapers, his eyes growing tired from squinting at the small print of archived articles. He found dozens of Jameses getting married in 1952, but none of the names or faces seemed right. None of them felt connected to the Margaret he had known. Just as William was beginning to lose hope, Mrs. Chen appeared beside him with a thick, leather-bound album. "I remembered something," she said, settling into the chair next to him. "This is our collection of high society wedding announcements from the 1950s. The wealthy families in town used to submit formal portraits and elaborate write-ups for their children's weddings." She opened the album to a page dated June 1952, and there, in a formal black-and-white photograph that took up half the page, was Margaret. But she looked like a completely different person from the woman William had married. This Margaret wore an elaborate wedding gown that must have cost a fortune, Her hair styled in perfect waves, her smile radiant, but somehow different from the warm, comfortable smile William remembered. Beside her stood a tall, handsome man in a perfectly tailored tuxedo. The caption beneath the photograph read, "Miss Margaret Elizabeth Hartwell and Mr. James Richardson Morrison III were united in marriage on June 15, 1952, at St. Catherine's Episcopal Church. The bride is the daughter of Judge Harold Hartwell and Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell of Hillcrest Manor. The groom is the son of Mr. James Richardson Morrison, Jr., and Mrs. Victoria Morrison of Morrison Industries." William stared at the photograph, his heart hammering in his chest. Margaret Elizabeth Hartwell. She had even used a different name. The Margaret he knew had been Margaret Rose Sullivan when they met, a kindergarten teacher living in a modest apartment downtown. She had told him her parents were dead and that she had no family. "The Morrisons were one of the wealthiest families in the state," Mrs. Chen explained softly, recognizing the shock on William's face. "Morrison Industries owned textile mills throughout the region, and Judge Hartwell was very prominent in local politics. This was considered the wedding of the year." William's hands shook as he traced Margaret's face in the photograph. She looked so young, so different from the woman who had become his wife 6 years later. There was something in her expression, a kind of reserved happiness that lacked the genuine warmth he had fallen in love with. "What happened to them?" William asked, his voice barely a whisper. Mrs. Chen turned several pages in the album, then stopped at a newspaper clipping from September 1954. The headline made William's breath catch. "Morrison heir dies in racing accident. Young industrialist killed at Watkins Glen." The article described how James Richardson Morrison III, age 26, had died when his race car crashed during a private racing event at the famous New York track. He had been an amateur racing enthusiast, despite his family's objections to what they considered a dangerous hobby. The crash had been instant and fatal. "So Margaret was a widow," William whispered, pieces of the puzzle beginning to fall into place. But Mrs. Chen shook her head. "That's not the end of the story. Look at this." She turned to another page, showing William a smaller newspaper item dated just 3 months later. "Young widow disappears from Morrison estate," read the headline above a brief article explaining that Margaret Morrison had left the family mansion without explanation and had not been seen since. The Morrison family had issued a statement saying they were concerned for her welfare and asking anyone with information about her whereabouts to contact authorities. "She ran away," William said, understanding beginning to dawn. "She left everything behind." "It seems so. And apparently she started over with a new name and a new life. That's how you met Margaret Sullivan 6 years later." William spent the rest of the morning at the library, piecing together what he could of Margaret's first life. The Hartwell family had been prominent in the area for generations. Judge Hartwell had been known as a stern man who expected his daughter to marry well and maintain the family's social standing. The marriage to James Morrison would have been seen as a perfect alliance between two powerful families. But the articles about James painted a picture of a young man who was more interested in fast cars and adventure than in running the family business. There were mentions of conflicts with his father, about his racing hobby and his reluctance to take on responsibilities at Morrison Industries. One Society columnist had noted that the young couple seemed perfectly matched in their desire to live life on their own terms. When Margaret's father died in 1955, just a year after James, there was a small obituary mentioning that Judge Hartwell was survived by his wife Eleanor. There was no mention of Margaret, as if she had been erased from the family history entirely. As William drove home that afternoon, his mind raced with this new understanding of the woman he had loved. Margaret hadn't lied to him about being alone in the world. She had made herself alone, cutting ties with a life that had brought her pain, and starting fresh. But why had she never told him? Why keep it secret for 40 years? Back at home, William found himself looking at everything with fresh eyes. The house that Margaret had inherited from her grandmother now seemed like it might have been purchased with money from her first marriage. Certain antiques and pieces of furniture that he had always assumed came from Margaret's modest family suddenly looked expensive and out of place. He returned to Margaret's jewelry box, this time examining each piece with new knowledge. Several items that he had always thought were gifts from him or simple purchases now seemed like they might be from her previous life. A pearl necklace that she claimed was from her grandmother looked like the kind of thing a wealthy young bride might have received as a wedding gift. But it was when William went through Margaret's books that he found the next piece of the puzzle. Hidden between the pages of an old cookbook was a photograph that made his heart stop. It showed Margaret and James on what appeared to be their honeymoon, standing in front of the Eiffel Tower in Paris. They looked genuinely happy, young and in love, with their whole lives ahead of them. On the back of the photograph, in Margaret's handwriting, was a note dated shortly after James's death. "We had 2 perfect years. How do I live the rest of my life without him?" William sat in Margaret's reading chair, holding the photograph and feeling like an intruder in someone else's love story. For 40 years, Margaret had carried this grief, this lost love, this part of herself that she couldn't share with him. He began to understand why she had never taken off her wedding ring. It wasn't just about her commitment to William. It was about never being able to fully remove the ring that James had given her, the love that had been cut short so tragically. As evening approached, William made his way to the kitchen and found Margaret's old recipe box. She had been famous among friends and family for her cooking, always seeming to have just the right dish for every occasion. But now, William wondered if some of these recipes had come from her first life, from the kitchens of Hillcrest Manor or from the elegant dinners she must have hosted as Mrs. James Morrison. Inside the recipe box, tucked behind a card for her famous apple pie, William found a letter that had never been mailed. It was addressed to Mrs. James Morrison, Sr., and dated just a month after James's death in 1954. "Dear Victoria," the letter began, "I know you blame me for James's death, and perhaps you are right. I should have tried harder to convince him to give up racing, but he was so passionate about it, so alive when he talked about cars and speed and the freedom he felt on the track. I couldn't bear to be the one to take that away from him." The letter went on to explain Margaret's decision to leave the Morrison family and start over elsewhere. "I cannot continue to live in the shadow of what we lost," she wrote. "Every room in this house reminds me of him. Every family dinner is a reminder that he will never sit at the head of the table as his father planned. I need to find a way to honor his memory while still finding a way to live." The letter concluded with an apology and a promise to never contact the family again, to let them grieve and heal without the constant reminder of what might have been. William realized that Margaret had spent the rest of her life trying to keep that promise. She had created a new identity, a new family, a new love, but she had never been able to completely let go of her first marriage. The ring hidden under the floorboard was proof that James had remained with her throughout her years with William. As darkness fell outside, William found himself in Margaret's garden, the place where she had spent countless hours tending to flowers and vegetables. Even here, he now noticed things that seemed out of place for a simple kindergarten teacher's garden. There were expensive bulbs and rare varieties of roses that suggested someone with both knowledge and means. But it was among the roses that William made his final discovery of the day. Behind a particularly large bush, almost hidden from view, was a small stone marker. It wasn't a gravestone exactly, but rather a memorial stone with an inscription that took William's breath away. "In memory of James Richardson Morrison III, 1928-1954. Forever yours. From the wife who could never forget." Margaret had created a shrine in her garden, a place where she could remember and mourn the love she had lost decades before William ever entered her life. For 40 years, she had tended this secret memorial, coming here to remember James while building a life with another man. William knelt beside the stone, finally understanding the full scope of Margaret's secret. She hadn't just hidden a ring or a previous marriage. She had hidden her entire heart, split between the love she had lost and the love she had found. The reason she never took off her wedding ring wasn't stubbornness or tradition. It was because removing it would mean acknowledging that James was truly gone, and she had never been able to do that completely. As William walked back to the house that night, he carried with him a new understanding of the complex woman he had married. Margaret hadn't deceived him out of malice or lack of love. She had been protecting both of them from a grief so profound that it had shaped every decision she made for the rest of her life. But even with this understanding came new questions that would torment William through another sleepless night. How much of Margaret's love had been real, and how much had been her attempt to build a new life over the ruins of her old one? Had she ever truly been his wife? Or had she always belonged to the ghost of James Morrison? William spent the following weeks consumed by his discoveries about Margaret's hidden past. He found himself analyzing every memory of their 40-year marriage, searching for clues he had missed, moments when Margaret's mask might have slipped to reveal the grief she carried beneath her cheerful exterior. There had been signs, he realized now. Margaret's inexplicable sadness every June 15th, which she had always claimed was just a difficult time of year for her. Her refusal to talk about her family or her life before they met, which William had attributed to painful losses rather than a deliberate concealment. The way she sometimes stared out the window with a distant expression, as if seeing something or someone that existed only in her memories. But it was Margaret's reluctance to travel that now made the most sense. William had always wanted to take her to Europe, especially to Paris, but Margaret had consistently found excuses to avoid such trips. She preferred quiet vacations, small towns, places that held no memories of her previous life. Now William understood that Paris would have been torture for her, a city where she had been happy with James, where their honeymoon photograph had been taken when the future seemed bright and endless. The more William learned about Margaret's first marriage, the more complex his feelings became. Part of him felt betrayed by the deception, angry that she had never trusted him enough to share the truth. But a larger part of him felt overwhelming sadness for the burden Margaret had carried alone for so many years. She had been a young widow who had lost not just her husband, but her entire world, her identity, her place in society. William decided he needed to know more about James Morrison. If Margaret had loved him enough to carry his memory for 40 years, then William felt compelled to understand what kind of man he had been. He returned to the library and spent days researching the Morrison family, reading everything he could find about James's short life. What he discovered was a young man who had been born into privilege, but had chafed against the expectations that came with his family's wealth and status. James had graduated from an Ivy League university, but had shown little interest in joining the family business. Instead, he had been passionate about cars, mechanics, and racing. Friends described him as charming but restless, someone who was searching for meaning beyond the traditional path laid out for wealthy young men of his generation. Most telling were the articles about James's racing career. He had been talented behind the wheel, winning several amateur competitions despite his family's disapproval of what they considered a dangerous and undignified hobby. Interviews with his racing friends revealed a young man who came alive on the track, who found in speed and competition the excitement missing from his prescribed life of board meetings and social obligations. William found himself developing an unexpected understanding of James Morrison. Like Margaret, James had been trapped by expectations, forced into a role that didn't fit who he truly was. Their marriage had probably been as much about escaping those constraints as it had been about love, two young people finding in each other the freedom to be themselves. But it was when William discovered James's own words that everything changed. In the Morrison family papers, donated to the local historical society years after the family's prominence had faded, William found a collection of letters James had written to a friend during his brief marriage. The letters revealed a young man deeply in love with his wife, grateful to have found someone who understood his need for adventure and authenticity. "Margaret doesn't try to change me," James had written in one letter. "She encourages my racing because she sees how alive it makes me feel. She says she fell in love with my passion, not my bank account or my family name. For the first time in my life, I feel like someone sees who I really am." Another letter, written just a month before his death, described plans James and Margaret had made to travel the world together. "We're going to see everything, experience everything. Margaret has this incredible appetite for life that matches my own. Sometimes I think we were put on this earth to save each other from the suffocating expectations of our families." Reading these letters, William finally understood the depth of what Margaret had lost. James hadn't just been her husband, he had been her partner in rebellion, her escape from a restrictive world, her companion in dreams of freedom and adventure. When he died, she had lost not just her love, but her co-conspirator, the only person who had truly understood her desire to live life on her own terms. The tragedy became even more poignant when William found James's will, filed in the county courthouse. The young man had been remarkably prescient about the dangers of his hobby. In the event of his death, he had left everything to Margaret, with specific instructions that she should use the inheritance to live the adventurous life we planned together, even if she must live it alone. But William also found evidence of the pressure Margaret had faced after James's death. The Morrison family had contested the will, arguing that such a large inheritance should remain within the family. They had offered Margaret a substantial settlement in exchange for renouncing her claim to James's estate. The legal documents showed that Margaret had eventually accepted their offer, taking a smaller sum and agreeing to never use the Morrison name again. This explained how Margaret had been able to disappear so completely to reinvent herself as Margaret Sullivan and start over. She had used James's money not to maintain the lifestyle of a wealthy widow, but to buy her freedom, to create a new identity far from the suffocating world that had ultimately killed her husband. Armed with this new understanding, William began to see his own marriage in a different light. Margaret hadn't used him as a substitute for James, nor had she been living a lie for 40 years. Instead, she had been trying to honor James's final wish by living the life they had planned together, just in a different way than either of them had imagined. The small house on Maple Street, the simple life of a kindergarten teacher, the quiet contentment of their marriage, these hadn't been compromises or settling for less. They had been Margaret's version of the authentic life she and James had dreamed of, stripped of wealth and status but rich in genuine connection and peace. William realized that Margaret had loved him completely and honestly, but she had never been able to fully close the door on her past because doing so would have meant abandoning the dreams she and James had shared. The ring hidden under the floorboard wasn't evidence of divided loyalty. It was proof that love doesn't disappear just because life moves forward. This revelation led William to make a decision that would have shocked him just weeks earlier. He drove to the cemetery where Margaret was buried and stood before her simple gravestone. In his pocket, he carried both rings, the elaborate platinum and diamond ring that James had given her, and the simple gold band that William himself had placed on her finger 40 years ago. "I understand now," he said aloud, feeling slightly foolish but needing to speak the words. "You weren't keeping secrets from me. You were keeping faith with him. And that's exactly what I would have expected from the woman I married." William knelt and carefully placed James's ring next to Margaret's headstone. She had never been able to bring her two loves together in life, but he could give her that peace in death. The ring caught the afternoon sunlight, sparkling with the same brilliance it must have had on her finger all those decades ago. But William's healing journey wasn't complete. He felt compelled to make one more connection, to close a circle that had been left open for 70 years. After considerable research and several phone calls, he managed to locate James's sister, Patricia Morrison Webb, now an elderly woman living in a retirement community in Florida. The phone call was awkward at first, with Patricia clearly suspicious of why someone would be calling about her long-dead brother. But when William explained about finding the ring and learning about Margaret's first marriage, Patricia's voice softened with emotion. "We never knew what happened to Margaret," Patricia confessed. "After she left, it was like she vanished from the earth. My parents were so angry about the inheritance dispute that they forbade us from talking about her, but I always wondered. James loved her so much." Patricia agreed to meet William, and 2 weeks later, he found himself driving to Florida with a car full of photographs, letters, and mementos from Margaret's hidden past. The meeting took place in Patricia's apartment, a cozy space filled with family photos that included several of James that William recognized from the newspaper archives. "She was good for him," Patricia said as they looked through the materials William had brought. "James was always restless before he met Margaret, always searching for something that would make him feel alive. She gave him that. They only had 2 years together, but they were the happiest 2 years of his life." Patricia shared her own memories of Margaret from those brief years. A young woman who had been warm and genuine despite her wealthy background, someone who had treated the Morrison household staff with kindness and had encouraged James to pursue his passions even when the family disapproved. "I think she saved him, in a way," Patricia reflected. "If he had lived, I believe they would have left all this behind. The family business, the social expectations, all of it. They would have found their own path." But it was when Patricia showed William a photograph she had kept for 70 years that the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. The picture showed Margaret and James at a small gathering, apparently taken just weeks before his death. But what caught William's attention was Margaret's expression: pure joy, unguarded happiness, the look of someone who felt completely loved and understood. It was the same expression William had seen on Margaret's face countless times during their own marriage, particularly in quiet moments when she thought he wasn't watching. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Margaret had loved them both completely, but differently. James had awakened her passion for life, while William had given her peace and healing. Neither love diminished the other. Together, they had made her complete. Before leaving Florida, William made a proposal that surprised even himself. He asked Patricia if she would like to visit Margaret's grave, to finally say goodbye to the woman who had made her brother so happy. Patricia, now in her 80s and rarely traveling, agreed immediately. 2 months later, Patricia stood beside William at Margaret's graveside. She placed a bouquet of white roses next to James's ring, now permanently positioned beside the headstone. "Thank you for loving him," Patricia whispered to the grave. "And thank you for finding a way to love again. James would have wanted you to be happy." As they stood together in the autumn sunlight, William felt a sense of completion he hadn't expected. Margaret's secret was no longer a burden, but a gift, evidence of her capacity for deep, enduring love and her strength in building a meaningful life despite devastating loss. That evening, back at home, William sat in his living room surrounded by the full story of Margaret's life. The photographs, letters, and documents were no longer hidden but displayed openly, integrated with the mementos of their own marriage. He had decided to donate many of the historical items to the local museum, ensuring that the story of James and Margaret's brief but intense love would be preserved. But it was Margaret's final letter to him, one he had found tucked inside the original jewelry box, that provided the closure he had been seeking. Dated just days before her death, it was her last gift to him. "My dearest William," the letter read, "if you have found James's ring, then you have discovered my secret. I hope you can forgive me for keeping this part of my past hidden, but I needed to protect both of us from a grief that might have poisoned what we built together. I want you to know that loving you was not a betrayal of James, nor was remembering James a betrayal of you. The heart is capable of holding multiple loves, each complete and perfect in its own way. James taught me how to love passionately and without reservation. You taught me how to love steadily and with trust. Both loves have made me who I am. I never took off my wedding ring because it represented not just my commitment to you, but my promise to never stop believing in love, even after loss. That ring was my reminder that love doesn't end with death. It transforms and continues in new ways. Please don't think our marriage was less real because I carried James in my heart. You were not my second choice or my consolation prize. You were my salvation, the man who showed me that it was possible to love again without forgetting what came before. I hope someday you will understand that keeping this secret was my way of honoring both of my loves, preserving the memory of James while protecting the life we built together. Now that I am gone, you are free to remember me completely, all the pieces of who I was, all the loves that shaped me. Be happy, my dear William. Find peace in knowing that you gave me 40 years of joy and contentment that I never thought possible after James died. You were my second miracle, proof that life always offers new chances for love. Forever grateful for the life we shared, Margaret." William folded the letter carefully and placed it with the others. As he looked around the room filled with evidence of Margaret's complex, beautiful life, he realized that his initial sense of betrayal had transformed into something much deeper, gratitude for having been chosen by a woman capable of such profound love. Margaret had never taken off her wedding ring because it represented her faith in love itself. Now William understood that their marriage had not been built on deception, but on hope. Margaret's hope that love could survive loss, that hearts could heal without forgetting, that it was possible to honor the past while embracing the future. In the months that followed, William found himself changed by his discoveries. He began volunteering at the local historical society, helping to preserve the stories of families like the Morrisons and Hartwells. He reached out to Patricia regularly, maintaining a friendship born from their shared connection to Margaret's memory. Most importantly, William learned to see his own life differently. Margaret's secret had shown him that love was not diminished by being shared or remembered. Instead, it was multiplied, creating a legacy that extended far beyond any single relationship. On quiet evenings, William would sit in Margaret's garden, tending to the flowers she had planted and maintaining the small memorial stone she had placed there for James. It no longer felt like tending to a shrine to another man's love, but rather caring for a testament to Margaret's incredible capacity to honor the past while building toward the future. And sometimes, when the light fell just right on the memorial stone and the roses bloomed with particular beauty, William could almost feel Margaret's presence. Not as the woman who had kept secrets, but as the woman who had loved so deeply and completely that she had changed everyone whose life she touched, including two men who had each thought themselves to be her only love, never realizing they were part of something much larger and more beautiful than either could have imagined alone.